Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I am Karin Winkler, and I am the CEO of the Montana Association of Realtors. We appreciate you taking the time today to join us to learn about our fabulous new Montana property tax law. We've got Jamie Bowditch here as our legal counsel to guide us through the conversation. We'll begin with Jamie's presentation, and we will follow that up with Q&A. Feel free to use the Q&A function. We will do our best to make sure that your questions get answered. And with that, I will turn it over to Jamie.
Yeah, thanks, Karin. Welcome everybody. It's, I guess, the first time I think that I've been on the Broker Power Hour and not talked about the NAR practice changes. But this is equally as not fun. But let me just kind of go over, and Karin's right. What I thought I'd do is just give you a kind of a high-level overview of the modifications that are going to take place in a graduated method over the course of the next couple of years. And how that may affect or at least govern what information you may want to provide to your clients, especially those clients who are interested in buying property in which they will not establish what I will call a principal or regular residence. So if you kind of remember in the 2025 legislature, there were a number of bills that were being monitored heavily by MAR. I think there were four main ones that were trying to do something with the property tax system. And of course, not that I need to tell anybody this, but one of the concerns of property taxes is that historically they've always been effectively taxed at a flat rate. And as more and more of the real estate, and by real estate, I mean, residential, commercial, ag, multifamily, the value in real estate in Montana as a whole, the percentage of that value or the increase in that value as a percentage was primarily attributed to residential real estate, which is why we were seeing some rather significant changes in our residential real estate taxes, especially over the course of the past probably 10 to 15 years, as especially since COVID, when Montana property values went up considerably just because of supply and demand. So what happened was that in a joint session, HB 231 and Senate Bill 542 were adopted. They substantially revised residential, commercial, and to some extent industrial property tax rates across Montana, effectively reallocating the tax base from residential occupied residences. And maybe as a little bit to kind of step back for a second, one of the things that is probably important to consider here is that the legislature, many of the legislators are of the belief or feel that non-owner occupied residential real estate was a significant factor in causing some of the increases in the property values. So anyways, as a general overview, property taxes are equal to, there's kind of a three-tiered calculation, right? There's the market value, and that's what the Department of Revenue does every 2 years now. It used to be 6 years, now it's 2 years. So it's the property taxes are equal to the market value of the real estate times the tax rate, which that calculation is then known as a taxable value, and then times the mill levies as adopted by the local governing bodies. The changes that have been made in the recent legislation are to the tax rate, the second calculation. And historically, the way that taxes have been assessed against residential real property was that it was 1.35% of the market value for the first 1.5 million, and then 1.89% for any value in excess of 1.5 million. So the changes adopted, or the changes that will go into effect as a result of these two new tax bills, are as follows. And it's a phased approach. So first of all, and some of you may have received the notifications. I have not yet, but I haven't. I'm actually up at my cabin right now, and so I haven't been home to see if I've gotten the mail. But some of you should receive notifications here shortly for your appraised value, which should include, I think, the information for the 2024 rebate. And this is similar to past rebates where it's a $400 rebate that you have to apply for. And in applying, you have to attest the fact that that this is your, principal residence. This is not available. This $400 rebate is not available for properties that are owned by entities and doesn't apply to vacant residential land. Then in 2025, and that's this year, right? But that is for the taxes that will be assessed and for which you will receive a tax notification in mid to late October, maybe early November. But for the taxes that are due at the end of November, beginning of January for the first half, it's a graduated tax rate. So the way it's going to work for 2025, and this is 2025 only, is that residential property will be taxed at a rate of 0.76 for the first $400,000 in market value, then 1.1 for anything between 400 and 1.5 million, and then 2.2% for any market value over 1.5 million. That is only for 2025. 2026 is when probably the more significant change comes into play that will have some impact on I think, non-occupied residential real estate. And in 2026, beginning that calendar year, but the tax assessment notices that will go out in November of 2026 or late October, there'll be a flat 1.9% tax rate applies applicable against all residential property unless that residential property qualifies for a homestead or a long-term rental reduction. If you are able to take advantage of that reduction, then it's again a graduated tax rate tied to the median residential value of property, which current estimates are somewhere between $350,000 and $400,000. I'm just going to say $400,000 to keep it simple. So for the first $400,000, the tax rate will be 0.76. For anything between $400,000 and $800,000, it'll be 0.9. For anything between 2 and 4 times the median value, it'll be 1.1. And then anything above 4 times the median value, i.e. somewhere around 1.6 million, will be 1.9%. The big thing here to consider is that these graduated tax rates, which should, reduce taxes for maybe the average median home, not, some of those higher end homes, are only applicable to those individuals who are able to claim the property as their homestead. I'll use homestead. They use homestead. I'll use principal residence, or as a long-term rental, which means that as a residence, it has to be something that you can attest to the fact that you have resided there as your primary residence for at least 7 months out of the 2026 and subsequent tax years. To claim the long-term rental property exemption, you have to be able to claim that it was rented for at least 28 days out of a month for a period of at least 7 months in the tax year in which you're requesting the reduced rate. So what does that mean? That means, in effect, that second homes, short-term rentals, or short-term rentals that are used as a short-term rental are not going to qualify for this homestead exemption amount. Instead, they're going to be taxed at the flat 1.9% from $0. Maybe some of the information that'll be kind of interesting is that the estimated projected effect on taxes for owner occupied is a decrease of 18% between now and 2026. They're predicting a 15% decrease in 2025. And again, remember, this is statewide. So this is kind of on an aggregate or an average, and may not be applicable to certain communities where home prices are more expensive. Missoula, Bozeman, Whitefish, Kalispell. But statewide, 18% reduction, 15% in 25, 4% in 26. For long-term rentals, they're anticipating a 2-year reduction of 22%, 8% in 25, then 27, in 26. The hope being that at least as indicated by the legislature, is that some of these tax savings in these long-term rentals will be passed on to tenants, making rents in some of the more expensive places more affordable. The big number to consider, again, this is a statewide average, and at least as far as some of the local areas are thinking significantly higher, is that for second homes or short-term rentals, that you may see property tax increases between 2024 and 2028, I'm sorry, 2026 of 68%. There's a good article, if not a great article, actually, by the Montana Free Press that came out right at the end of May, shortly after the governor signed the bills, that actually I would highly recommend that people look at, because this breaks down their projections of how this is going to impact people in other communities, on a community-wide basis as opposed to a statewide basis. But for example, if I recall correctly, for non-occupied homes, they're expecting Missoula County to see a cumulative increase in the tax rates of 105%, so more than double. Haviland, I think they said, or Lewis and Clark County, they said 94%. So, exactly how this is going to affect people in various communities is going to be determined on a community by community basis. But the important thing that I think all need to realize is that for those individuals that you may, and I think really this information that I'm providing today is primarily intended to benefit or directed towards individuals representing buyers who may be interested in acquiring property in Montana that they will not intend to reside in on a full-time basis. Because, right now, all you have when you get your commitment is what the 2024 taxes were. And if the 2024 taxes were, let's just say, $3,000, and somebody is buying that property to use as a second home or a short-term rental, that $3,000 is definitely not going to be indicative of what the taxes will be in 2026. And, can we calculate what those taxes will be to the dollar or penny? No, that's very difficult to do because it depends on things like mill levies. But I think the important thing that you need to be advising your buyer clients who are buying properties that are not going to qualify for this homestead exemption or long-term rental exemption is that the 2024 tax bill, which is the only piece of information that they have currently, is probably not going to be an accurate indicator of what holding costs will be on a going forward basis, especially as to the real estate taxes. I think, I know that's a quick and very high level overview for the taxes. And I see there's already a bunch of questions in the webinar. And I guess, it might just be easy to, are you able to kind of go through them, Karen? Because I'm kind of
Yes.
to that point.
Yes. So
Okay.
does this affect rentals not occupied by owners?
Ooh, well, I
Well,
mean, a rental, I mean,
yeah, by
that,
default, it's not occupied by
yeah,
the owner.
right. I mean, what it affects is rental property where the tenants, where you are not renting it out to tenants who reside there at least 28 days. Here's the best way I can say it, is that it needs to be rented out to qualify for the long-term rental to individuals who are intending to reside there as their primary residence, not a short-term rental, and on a long-term basis, meaning at least 28 days a month and for 7 months out of the year. So, in effect, what does that mean? I mean, and there are some exceptions to that, right? You can, like, they will allow for a situation where the property is vacant for 5 months for to make property or repair work and things like that. But, you're going to have to be renting to the same tenant. You're not going to qualify if you rent to 10 people in 28 days, and you're rolling it over. That's a short-term rental, and it wouldn't qualify for the long-term rental, and so you'd have to pay the 1.9% tax on that property.
Where can we get a homestead exemption form that doesn't have sample language marked on it?
So so that's a great question. And so I should have mentioned that. So here's what's supposed to happen, um, is that for those individuals who are going to qualify for the $400 tax rebate, you should be receiving or may have already received notification that you will be able to apply for this online. I am assuming, I haven't looked at it yet, but I'm assuming it's going to be very similar to the application that we submitted when you could qualify for that $675 rebate that the 2023 legislature passed. But what'll happen is that there will be, so the application process begins August 15th, so about another 30 days, and ends October 1st. And so that's probably why if you've seen a sample form, you're only seeing a sample form right now, because that's what you'll fill in online. If you do that and you're doing it on behalf of your primary residence, then that application will be used for future years. So you'll qualify then for the 2026 homestead exemption simply by filling out the $400 rebate. If somebody acquires a home, let's just say in early 26 and wants to apply for the homestead exemption, I haven't seen it yet, but the Department of Revenue should be disseminating or providing a form. And I suspect, again, it's going to be online that you would fill out so that you can qualify for that graduated tax rate.
My understanding is that you have 30 days to challenge the assessment. I just received mine yesterday, and then I'm afraid to open the envelope, so it's unopened. So is it true that challenging the assessment can also lead to the assessment going up?
Yeah, so what I'm talking about here, what I have been talking about, and what HB 231 and SB 542 did was to change the tax rate, right? That's the rate against, that's the percentage applied against your market value. What everybody is receiving or may have already received in the mail is the biennium market value that the Department of Revenue conducted as of 1/1/2024. And so for the 25 and 26 tax years. So what you can challenge that with the Department of Revenue if you feel that the market value of your home is determined by the Department of Revenue is too high. And the process for doing that is not overly complicated. The form to be submitted the initial form to be submitted is what's called a Form AB 26. And you should be able to Google that. It's provided by the Department of Revenue. It's not only a form to fill out, but it also has instructions. And what the Form AB 26 does is it is a mechanism by which you can say, hey, you valued my home at, for example, $500,000. That's not accurate. I've got information to prove that it's not worth more than $450,000. I want you to reconsider the market value determination that you've made. I've done it. I actually did it when we built our home back in 2020 or in 2002. There were certain assumptions made by the appraiser that were incorrect. And so I contacted her, had her come out to my house. She walked through my house and we actually got I can't remember what it was, but it was around a 13 or 14% reduction in market value back in 2002. So that's the process you go through. I mean, if the Department of Revenue decides through the filing of the AB 26 that they just don't feel that an adjustment is warranted, you can then go up to the State Tax Appeal Board or the County Tax Appeal Board, the STAB or CTAB. And that's a little bit more robust process where you go before a hearing panel and things like that. May suggest that you have representation, but it isn't required. But that's the process. But know this, that your time for challenging your market value assessment is 30 days after you receive your assessment notice, irrespective of whether you open the envelope or not, Karen.
I'll open it tonight.
I mean, that and that in of itself is the statewide average, and the increase in property values was estimated to be around 12%. Again, that's statewide average. I'm sure there are jurisdictions where that's significantly more. But that is the process to challenge the market value determination if you want to do so. The only last thing I'll say on that is the Department of Revenue does have the ability to make an adjustment the other way as well. So I haven't seen that happen very frequently, but if you, for example, they say, well, yeah, we'll want to come out and take a look at your house, and then they come out and take a look at your house and determine that their original assessment from the information they had provided to them was inaccurate and too low, they can increase it.
What happens when a business owns a property that is mixed use? How would that be taxed?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that we're still trying to figure out. That's going to be one of them. If you've got, for example, a office building, and on the first floor you have a retail tenant, and on the second floor is your residence, right? You live up there in a condo, and it's all taxed as one, which I would hope it shouldn't be because of the residential use. Then they should, I think, probably split that because of the two different ways of taxing it. And so you may have to submit something, if they don't already separately tax it, to request two assessment notices, notwithstanding that you have one legal piece of property.
Should this go in the seller's OPD?
You know, That's a good question. And, MAR back about a month ago provided some language for people to incorporate into governing, relevant documents. I think the primary intent, as I indicated earlier, was that language is to be used to provide to your buyer clients. Uh, you know, I don't consider this an adverse material fact. I mean, I certainly don't, there's nothing wrong with a seller who might want to be conservative, putting information into an OPD that explains that, the property taxes may increase. But I mean, people are on notice of this. This is not what I would call a latent defect that is not known by buyers. Um, and it's kind of difficult because, right? I mean, you could own your home and be selling your home in which you live, and you have no idea if a buyer is going to buy it and decide to live there as their home, or they're going to buy it as a short-term rental. So the impact on the taxes may depend on the buyer's use. But in conclusion, there's nothing wrong with you putting it in there just to make certain people know about it. I just don't know that I would say that it's something that is legally required under the OPD law that was passed in 2023.
What about vacant land?
Well, so vacant land is, you know, I mean, if we're talking about qualification for the homestead exemption, I don't see how that's ever going to apply, because you can't claim vacant land as your primary residence unless maybe you have like a trailer park there or something like that. So I don't anticipate vacant land is going to qualify for the homestead exemption.
Is there some immediate action owners of primary residences need to take to ensure their property is not taxed as a second home?
Well, again, if using myself or Karin as an example, right? When assuming if we're talking about the property in which I live in Missoula, I will be submitting for the $400 rebate, and that will be the mechanism by which the Department of Revenue will be notified that I claim my house in Missoula as my primary residence. That is going to then qualify or constitute the notification that would continue to allow you to claim the homestead exemption for the 2025 or the 2026 year. For the one thing that I don't know how they're going to do yet, although I've kind of heard that they anticipate having a form, is that for those individuals who didn't have a primary residence in Montana that qualified for the 2024 rebate, like maybe they moved here in 2026, there's probably a process that you would go online and claim your homestead exemption. And basically it's going to be asking a few simple questions. Are you a resident of Montana? Do you claim, this property as your primary residence? Have you lived in there for 7 months out of the past 12 months, and things like that? but that it should be an online process, and I suspect you'll see more about that once we get into the, past and through the rebate for 2024 and through the 2025 tax year. I would anticipate you'll start seeing something in early 26 from the Department of Revenue. I've been told that they're coming up with a form. I have not seen even a draft of the form, but I suspect it will be something that is done online.
You mentioned non-entity for homestead benefit. So a trust is also an entity. So how does that work?
Well, and so yeah, so the non-entity the lack of the inability of an entity to claim a home is not related to the homestead exemption. It's the $400 rebate that is for the 2024 tax year that we've already paid the taxes on. In 2026, it's going to be based on use. And while I have not seen anything to verify this for certain, the ownership of, for example, let's just say you own your primary residence, and due to some estate planning advice that you received, the primary residence in which you reside is owned by your trust, an estate planning mechanism to pass your assets upon your death. That should be fine. The ownership for 2026 and going forward is not going to matter, at least shouldn't matter, because it's not based on ownership, it's based on use. So if you can claim that, yeah, you own the house through the, Karin Winkler Revocable Living Trust, but you, Karin Winkler, live there and you have lived there for 7 months, you should qualify for that lower graduated tax rate, notwithstanding that the ownership is in your trust.
How will it work if a family purchases a property and one of their children will be living in it full time with no long-term rental contract?
Well, if the owner is other than the resident, then it can't be the resident's primary, then the owner can't claim it as their primary residence. So, if I own a home and my child lives there, then I'm not going to be able to claim it as my primary residence because I don't live there. However, if I'm renting it to my child, and it doesn't have to be for market rent, but if my child is living there and they're living there for 28 months a year, 28 days a month for 7 months out of the year, it should qualify for the long-term rental status.
If property use changes from principal residence to non-owner occupied or STR, what is the timeline for the tax rate to change?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I'm a little uncertain on. I can't, here's the situation as I see it, right? It's that, and I'll just give a hypothetical. So I own the house that I live in, and in June of 26, I decide I'm going to sell it, and I sell it. And so, for the 26 taxes, the tax rate is based upon the primary residence. So the tax rate is that lower graduated amount instead of the flat 1.9%. And then I sell it to an individual and we close on July 1st, and that individual decides to use it as a short-term rental. Are they going to have to, I don't think the Department of Revenue is going to come in and reassess the second half of 2026 at the higher tax rate. I don't know that, but I just can't imagine how that's going to work, but maybe they will. I think what's more likely to occur is that, there will be some requirement probably adopted through regulations that you have to submit, when a property changes hands, that there's a requirement that you submit either that the new owner is going to use it as a primary residence or not going to use it as a primary residence. And the next tax year, then the taxes will go up to or down accordingly. But that I'm not certain of 100%. I'm kind of speculating, but those are some things that are still having to be worked out.
So here's probably a very common situation in Montana. A cabin that is rented for 5 months, but winterized and not inhabitable for 7 months of the year. What's going to happen with that?
And so under that example, I'm going to assume that the 5 months during which it was rented it was rented to the same tenant. Um, yeah, that's a great question that I don't know the answer to, at least insofar as the way the legislation is written. That wouldn't qualify for a long-term rental because you haven't passed the 7-month threshold. So, I guess, and maybe this is being a little cutesy, but if you've got a cabin that you're renting up on the lake to a tenant who's residing there 5 months out of the year, I would suggest renting it to them for maybe another month on either side of the 5 months and just not charging them anymore. At least then you can say you've rented it. There's no requirement that the rental amount be market or that it be a dollar amount at all.
What if multiple owners are on the deed? Can one owner still declare a homestead exemption?
Well, it isn't the owner is not claiming the homestead exemption. The property is claiming the homestead exemption. So, you would claim the exemption for that property because that's what establishes the taxes for that property. So you don't claim the homestead on an individual basis. You claim the homestead on a property basis, but you have to claim that at least somebody, you as one of the owners is residing there. Now, if one of the owners is residing there and one of the owners is residing somewhere else, I don't think that's going to disqualify you from claiming that as the primary residence, but it may disqualify the other owner from claiming a different property as their primary residence. So the question that I sometimes get is, okay, husband and wife own a property in Flathead and a property in Missoula, and the husband claims the property in Missoula as the primary residence, and the wife claims the property in Polson as the primary residence. I think that's probably not going to fly with the Department of Revenue if they can establish that you're not separated and are actually living together at one or the other.
Okay, now this is a good one. How would a triplex be taxed in the scenario where the owner occupies one unit is an STR, and one is a long-term rental unit?
Well, I mean, assuming a triplex has three separate legally described parcels, right? Each unit's going to be taxed. And if the one, the one in which the owner lives would be taxed as a homestead, the one in which the owner rents long-term would be taxed as a long-term rental, both at the graduated lower tax rate, and the one that the owner rents on a short-term rental basis would be taxed as at the flat 1.9%.
Can an LLC renting long-term properties qualify for the homestead exemption?
No, right? Not the homestead exemption, because the homestead exemption requires that you live there, but it can qualify for the long-term rental, if that's the question. I mean, well, will you read that question back, Karen? I may have misinterpreted it.
Can an LLC renting long-term properties qualify for the homestead exemption?
Yeah, I mean, not the homestead exemption, because the homestead exemption is the exemption related to your primary residence, but it can qualify for the long-term rental reduction, and they're equal, right? Whether it's your primary residence or a long-term rental, you get the graduated 0.76, 0.9 rate as opposed to the flat 1.9. So, I mean, the answer is, can you have an entity that owns a long-term rental and still qualify for the long-term rental reduction? Yes.
How about commercial property?
W- What
Are they,
about it?
is commercial property affected by the new tax law?
There are some changes in the commercial property. Basically, what is in it's not significant though. So what's going to happen is in 2025, the tax rate for commercial property between 1 and 6 times the median value, which they're estimating at 356. So, basically from 0 to 2.1, the commercial property in 25 is going to be 1.5, 1.4%, and 26, 1.5%. For anything above that, it'll be 1.89 and 1.9. So there's not really a significant increase in commercial property. I think I'm scanning to find it. I think the estimated increase in commercial property taxes is roughly 3% from 2024 to 2026, so not significant.
Okay, so we talked about putting this in the ODP. Should this be mentioned in your buyer's representative agreement?
Yeah, I think it should be, especially if you know that the buyer you are representing is not intending to acquire the property as their primary residence. And that is why, I think it's been about 30 days. I know it was before the end of June. MAR sent out some language that you can incorporate into your buyer representation agreements that we recommend that you use. We will also be adding that language to the buyer representation agreement, maybe the buy-sell agreements, and maybe, elsewhere when the form changes come out that were passed here recently.
Okay, and that was a standalone email that was sent out in May. I know Sam is doing some background work for me. So Sam, if you could find that language and put it in the chat, that would be helpful. So how does this affect ADUs if the ADU is used as an STR? How many acronyms can we throw out there?
I know this is the one that we are trying to look into, and as of right now don't have an answer to. But this is the one that I think is going to be the most common, right? Is like, you have a resident, you're on the lot on which you live, you have your house, and then you have an ADU above your garage. I mean, this happens all the time. I mean, when I travel a lot of times, especially when I go to the Bobcat games, that's where I stay. I stay at a short-term rental right downtown above the guy's garage, and it's lovely. But but it's all on one tax bill, and so I don't really know how they're going to do this, other than what they may end up doing is separating out somehow the value of that ADU from the rest of the property and taxing it at that higher tax rate. That's the only thing that I can think that they're going to do, but I don't know the answer to that right now. And I feel bad not knowing a lot of these answers. And I think somewhat it's the effect of kind of how we got to where we are, where it was kind of the last minute decisions by the legislature and combining two tax bills and just not able to take into consideration all these potential scenarios. But we're looking into it and we'll let you know. I think from a what would I do as a realtor standpoint, if you've got an individual who is going to buy a home where there is an ADU that's being used as a short-term rental and they anticipate that they will continue to do so after they acquire it, I think you should let them know that, they may see a tax increase at least as applicable to the ADU valuation.
How about, boy, Candace Dorsch is on fire. What about a property with a livable unit that can be rented out long-term and also has a unit for the owner? Is it still considered a long-term rental?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, but it doesn't really matter because, again, whether it's a long-term rental or it's where you live, it's going to be taxed at the same rate. So, if you've got, I've got a client that has this. She's got a house. She lives on it. She lives in the house, and then in the basement of the house, she's got a little apartment that has a separate access to it that she rents out long-term. I mean, I don't see that there's no reason to separately assess the basement unit from the rest of the house because they'll all be taxed at the same rate, provided she continues to rent it out on a long-term basis.
What if the owners are a grandparent and a grandchild? The grandchild lives there full-time and pays the mortgage. The grandparent had to go on the deed for the grandchild to get the loan. What would that look like?
Yeah, that I can speculate that again, it may not really matter. I guess, if the grandparents on the deed and only the grandparents on the deed, then you're probably best claiming it as a long-term rental as opposed to a homestead. If the grandparents on the deed and the child is on the deed as well, then it seems to me, if the child's the primary occupant, it's their primary residence, you probably would qualify at least as the for the child for that property as a homestead exemption. But, once again, remember this, right? Whether it's your primary residence, i.e. the homestead, or a long-term rental, the tax rate is the same. So it doesn't matter as between those two because they get taxed at the same rate.
Will office property that is rented on a yearly basis be exempt?
No, because that's not again, the long-term rental applies to residential property. That will be taxed as commercial. You're muted, Karen. I think Sam's trying to add language to the chat maybe, but they're not.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, President Robin. Do you think this will change drastically next session?
That's a question that we've been pondering and I've been asked quite a bit. It's a tough one. I don't think we're going to see a drastic change. This is not exactly what the governor wanted, but it was close enough, and obviously he signed it. During the next session, the governor will still be the governor. So my crystal ball tells me that they will probably see how this works, and unless there's some huge problem that I'm not seeing right now, I think this is going to make it through. I don't think you're going to see some significant changes. You might see some minor tweaks here and there in the 2027 session, but that's me speculating, prognosticating. So that's what I think. And I think they're just going to want to see how this shakes out and have a little bit more than 2 years to do so. So I would not anticipate significant changes as a result of the 27 legislature is what I believe.
So I don't know if you can tackle this one or not, because of course we know that this is also going to be dependent on individual counties and what they have in place. So this is a question about Billings. So can you talk about how this will work in Billings when there is a mill levy cap?
No. I can't. I want to caution people to be very careful about that, right? Because the question you're going to get, unfortunately, is going to be, okay, my taxes are going to go up because I have this short-term rental that I own in Bozeman. So what's it going to be, right? I'm going to buy this. What's it going to be? Well, that you don't know the answer to that. You know that they're going to go up, right? Because you know that the tax rate is going to go up. But exactly what the tax amount is going to be is almost impossible to predict because you don't know what the mill levies will be, even though they're capped. I mean, mill levies are capped anyways, right? They're capped at one, I can't remember exactly what it is, but something tied to inflation. But so, you need to be very, very careful about not getting caught in trying to opine on what the dollar value of the taxes may be on a future basis, because it's just not something that I or you can calculate, given that it depends on the mill levies as adopted by the local municipality.
Okay. I'm not sure if you can answer this one. How would the Department of Revenue know if something was rented for 6 months or 7 months or not?
Yeah, that's a good question. They won't. And, I'm going to say this, but I don't want it to be interpreted as Jamie advocating for anything. I don't believe there's much of a fiscal note attached to this, at least not as it pertained to, additional revenue agents in trying to enforce this. So what the revenue is going to rely on is the fact that you're going to attest, as far as the principal resident status or the long-term rental reduction status, that you're going to be truthful. And when you submit your application for the reduction for one of those two situations, that you're going to be honest. And if somehow, some way they come finding out that you aren't renting on a long-term basis or you don't live there for 7 months out of the year, then they will come back and obviously assess you the taxes that you should have been paying, plus penalties, plus interest. But how are they going to figure it out? I don't know how they're going to figure it out. I suspect the most common situation is going to be one in which Somebody converts a principal residence to a short-term rental. The neighbors aren't happy about it. They start complaining to people, and ultimately that complaint gets all the way up to the Department of Revenue, and they look into it. But they're not. It's not like they're going to have people walking around the street and checking to make certain that your tenants are residing there 28 days out of the month and 7 months out of the year.
So that kind of leads into the next question. Does it have to be the same tenants for all those 28 days per month for at least 7 months, or just in totality? So could you have one tenant in for 3 months and then another tenant in for 4 months and still have that count as the 7 months?
The exact question I am uncertain of, but what you will have to be testifying to is that the rental of the property was intended to be occupied by tenants who use the dwelling as their primary residence. So, you know, that's why I was saying earlier, like, if you're fortunate enough to have a short-term rental where your occupancy is such that 28 days out of the month, you have somebody residing there for 7 months out of the year, unless you can claim that those individuals were residing there as their primary residence, it's not going to work. You can satisfy the 28 days and you can satisfy the 7 months, but you're satisfying it with multiple different residents, none of whom are probably able to claim that it was their primary residence.
Okay, and it looks like the language has just been posted into the chat. So then here's a great question. What is our tax going to increase? How do we get more info on the mill levy to help give an estimate? We have clients thinking their $2 million residence is going to have a tax of 40,000.
Well, I think the best thing you can do, I mean, is to, again, either, if you want to take a dive. So I'll say this, and maybe I can try to post it to the chat, which I'll do right now. Maybe if I'm this. Okay, so I just posted to the chat, although maybe it just went to the hosts and panelists, but I posted to the chat the article that the Montana Free Press did. And I believe, and this is an article that I think you're going to have to look at online, but there's county by county projections on what the increases will be for owner occupied long-term rentals, ag land, non-homestead residential, commercial property, ag land. And I think the best thing you can do is just say, okay, we know what your 2024 taxes were. According to the information for Gallatin County, non-homestead residences are going to go up 71% from 2024 to 2026. So increase the 2024 tax amount by 71% to come up at what a rough estimate of what the 2026 taxes will be, subject to adjustments up or down, depending upon the mill levies. That's probably the best you can do.
Okay.
And, and I'm not being critical of local governments, but, I in my experience, the fact that they receive an increase in taxes based on the increase in the market value has not significantly decreased the mill levies. And part of that is just, we're funding the majority of the important, the important stuff that is funded by taxes are almost entirely funded by property taxes. So it's very difficult to kind of even reduce those property taxes or the amount that is used by local governments when property values go up.
Okay. Sandy Lee has her hand raised, so I'm going to allow her to talk.
Okay, Sandy, you're on mute, just so you know.
Okay. Maybe Sandy does not have a question. Okay, I see that everyone is saying in the chat that my attempt at circumventing the copy doesn't work, so we will be sending that out to you after the webinar. A duplex is rented annually to an entity for their employees, which come and go during the year. Is that a long-term rental?
Yeah, that may be getting a little too specific. I Here's what I would say. I would be concerned that probably not, but I mean maybe, right? The prob the long-term rental to the entity is in of itself, right? It's presumably rented for 7 months, but you still, I don't know that you can qualify that the actual tenants residing there are doing so as their primary residence. So, or as a residence. So I would think that might be difficult.
There's one question I skipped over because I don't want you to answer it. So I'm going to ask it and then you're going to not answer it. Um, can you advise on any loopholes on how?
Um,
please say no. Please say
yeah,
no.
I'll say no for two reasons. One, I'm not going to advise on any loopholes in of itself. Number two is I don't, I, you know, it's going to take more time to figure out whether there are any, but I'm not seeing many. I mean, I think they've done a good job, if you want to call it that, at trying to make certain that, that the benefit of this reduction in tax rates is afforded only to those individuals who reside in the property for which the reduced rate is applied for.
Okay. And then I've seen this question a couple times. Is there a source where is there a schedule somewhere where people can look and see what tax is going to be across for different counties?
Well, again, I mean, generally speaking, I mean, not to an exact dollar amount, there's a projection as to what the county by county tax increases will be in that article, that May 22nd, 2025 article that the Montana Free Press put out. And like I said, if you click on it, you can kind of go, then there's a bunch of drop down boxes, so you can go county by county. The other thing would be to, if you want a specific property, to contact a person at the county to see if they can provide some information of what they anticipate those taxes will be. But, once again, it's going to depend on the mill levies, and sometimes those are just not known.
I think, oh wait, the question was about the statewide median average schedule that is referenced in the formula.
Well, yeah. So the formula, what I think you're talking about there is that for 2026, the tax rate. So the way the tax rate will work, right? There's the graduated tax rate system is 0.76, then 0.9, then 1.1, then 1.9. And for the first three, it's 0 to 1 median value, then 1 to 2 median value, then 2 to 4 median value, and then the 1.9% is 4 times median residential value. Well, that's going to be the median residential value across the state for 2026, which is not currently known, but is anticipated to be $395,000. And that schedule, there is no schedule. That's just that's kind of what people are projecting who have worked on studying these to be the estimated statewide median home value for 2026.
Okay, and our last question. How about a personal property with a primary residence that also has RV sites on the property that are rented out nightly?
Yeah. Again, I don't know, you know, that's kind of similar to the ADU, right? But because you're still talking short-term rental, not long-term rental, probably not a residence for the RV sites. So, seems to me that the RV sites are not going to qualify for either the homestead or the long-term rental reduction. How they're going to parcel out or allocate out the value of the RV sites from the value of the home site. I don't know how they're going to do that yet. But they'll probably have to work on that. But I would anticipate that you may see an increase in the taxes, at least insofar as it pertains to the RV sites, especially if they're RV sites that are rented on a non-long-term basis, like not a mobile home park, but an RV where somebody comes and camps for the weekend.
All right. And that brings us to the end of our hour, the Jamie hour. This webinar has been recorded. We will get the recording up onto our website. We will include the link into remarks that will go out tomorrow. And, if you have questions, send them in. We'll do the best we can to answer them, or maybe provide to Jamie to get some Q&A that we can post. So if you have questions, info@montanarealtors.org.
Yeah, thanks everybody. And certainly the last thing I'll say is, as additional information becomes available, whether it be from, research we've done, I'm hoping or anticipating that Department of Revenue is probably going to adopt some regulations. MAR will continue to keep you apprised as we gather that additional information. And I'm sure we'll continue to talk about this again. I suspect this may not be my last Broker Power Hour ever.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.